All right, we've had a change of plans and a change of scenery, so here we are with the bookshelf in the background now. It's a work in progress. Don't look too harshly. I know y'all like to look behind me and comment on the books and stuff like that. Feel free, but it's a work in progress. But I really like it. Finally got the bookshelf. So this Letterboxd recap, what I watched in April, is actually a really exciting month, I would say, because although I watched like 13 movies only, it was kind of a slow month for movie watching, I would say, and 7 of them are rewatches. The new ones that I watched are actually new movies that just came out, or some of them just came out and have been requested a lot for me to talk about. But a decent amount of new horror and just some really fun movies that I'm really excited to talk about that I watched this month. It was a good month. So before we get into the video, I just want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of different types of inspiring classes for creatives. You can explore new skills or strengthen existing passions or discover new hobbies. One of my favorite classes that I've actually taken on Skillshare has been Find Your Style: 5 Exercises to Unlock Your Creative Identity by Andy J. Pizza. I've actually talked about this class in a previous video when I mentioned Skillshare, but I actually finished it and I just love his perspective on finding your creative identity and how it's okay to fail and make mistakes, and honestly that is required in part of finding your creative identity. Skillshare is meant just for learning, so that means that there is absolutely no advertisements at all, and they're always launching brand new classes on topics from photography, graphic design, video creation, as well as lifestyle entrepreneurship and freelancing. There really is a class for everyone on Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. After that, it's only around $10 a month with an annual membership. So let's just jump into the movies. No more intro, let's get started. So the first movie that I ended up watching was a documentary called The Last Blockbuster, which is a recent movie. It says created in 2020, but I think it might have been released in 2021. This was obviously a documentary about the Last Blockbuster, you know, the standalone store of Blockbuster, and kind of its history and how Blockbuster started to how it became bankrupt and closed down most, if not all, of their stores besides the one in Bend, Oregon. So what I really liked about this documentary, I rated it a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd because although I really enjoyed like the first half of the documentary, I'll get to what I disliked about it in a second. I loved the first half. I loved the nostalgia of this and the promotion, I guess, of physical media, because as you know, I'm a huge collector of physical media. I like to have them physically, not just digitally. And there was a lot of interesting history about Blockbuster that I was not aware of. So I really enjoyed a lot of that. And also the people that they chose to interview for the documentary I thought were relevant. They gave good insight and good opinions about everything. Now, what I disliked about it, this could have been like a perfect documentary and would have gotten like 4.5 stars out of me if it stopped at like an hour and a half. I feel like it didn't need to be, I think it was 2 hours long. It just dragged on. It became repetitive and it focused so much on the last manager of the Last Blockbuster, you know? And I loved her perspective and everything. Don't get me wrong, I liked her being a part of it, but it just felt like it dragged on. Like we didn't need all of it. And like all of the stuff with her in it. I don't know. I don't want to be mean because I respect her and her job and everything like that. But some of it just was a little bit repetitive. It just definitely could have been a shorter documentary and more concise, and it would have been perfect because the tone of it, the history, the structure of the documentary was actually done really well until we got to like the last 30 minutes. And you could turn it off at that point and get the whole basis of that documentary. But I do recommend it, at least to the 1.5 hour mark. I do recommend it. The next movie I know a lot of you are going to be very excited for me to talk about, and that is the new Wrong Turn reboot that just came out in 2021. Now, to be honest, I like the Wrong Turn franchise. However, I've only seen the first 2. I know. I want to watch all of them, and I'm on the hunt for the pack that has like all 6 movies or something like that. I know they get a little bit repetitive and like bad towards the middle and last ones, but I do enjoy the first two movies a lot. I definitely would have made this its own review had I watched it sooner, and I kind of wish I watched it sooner, so I could have reviewed it on its own, but we're gonna talk about it now. So this of course follows a group of friends on an expedition through the Appalachian Trail, which I'm actually really excited it takes place on the Appalachian Trail because my favorite book by Stephen King, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, takes place on the Appalachian Trail. So anytime that's mentioned, I mean, it's a dream for me to go, so I like seeing it. The friends come across a group of people who have been living in the woods for hundreds of years. Now this movie was so not what I expected. Which I actually really liked about it. One of the best parts about it is that it was so unpredictable. Once you saw the group of people living in the woods for hundreds of years, it became a different kind of movie, which is a good and a bad thing. It was so different from the original Wrong Turn, and I actually really appreciated that because it needed to be unique and original in some way in order for it to be a pretty decent reboot and not seem just like a remake of the original, I suppose. The gore, another amazing aspect of this movie. Loved it. It was way more intense than I thought it was going to be, which is kind of silly because the original is pretty gory too. So why I thought that, I don't know, but I was kind of like taken aback at some points with the gore. I gave this movie a 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and the reason is because I disliked a lot about this movie, unfortunately. 3 out of 5 I think is pretty decent. I would watch it again for sure. I love the setting. The setting is one of my favorite parts about it. Obviously the Appalachian Trail, it's beautiful woods. Love anything taking place in the woods. But the ending, so unnecessary. You could have cut that off. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, the last bit. We didn't need that. I feel like it needed to be edited a little bit more and more concise of a movie, and then it would have been 10 times better. Also, this may or may not be the best type of reboot for Wrong Turn fans. If you're a fan of the original franchise, I don't know if this is going to be a really good reboot for most people because I don't think people were expecting how different this movie was actually going to be. So it could really rub Wrong Turn fans the wrong way, or maybe it's introducing something different to the franchise. I don't know. Also, wish they would have expanded a little bit more on the plot and how those people survived and lived in the woods for hundreds of years and no one found them. I guess everyone that did find them was murdered, I'm assuming. But it just was not believable. There was so much about this that was not believable, from the character choices, like what the characters chose to do. It was just a little bit fantastical and not realistic. At least, I mean, I guess the original kind of has that going on for it too, but it felt more realistic than this one at least. So 3 out of 5, maybe 2.5 out of 5 if I'm honest, but I did enjoy it enough to where I would rewatch it for like summertime, woods, camping kind of vibes. I would rewatch it. Next up, we're gonna talk about my favorite movie that I watched in the month of April, The Dark and the Wicked. Again, a recent movie, came out in 2020. I'm so happy to be talking about so many recent things in this video because I feel like, you know, with theaters not being fully open and horror movies not really being released for the past year, it's just a nice breath of fresh air to finally talk about some new movies for a change. So this was my favorite new movie that I watched in this month of April, and it's on Shudder, so make sure you go and watch it. Please, please watch this. This follows two siblings who go to live with their dying father on a rural farm where they get a growing sense that something evil has taken over the family. There's so much to like about this. The setting, first of all, I love the atmosphere and the symbolism about death in this movie. It's just a beautiful, such a well done movie. The only thing I really disliked about it, not even that passionately at all, it was just the mood I was in, to be honest. It's a little bit slow. The pacing gets a little slow. So if you're not in the mood for an atmospheric, slow drama horror, this probably isn't gonna be your movie, but if you are, this is the one because it is gorgeous. And the horror elements are amazing. I need to underline that point. The horror in this is so good. I gave that a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. It was incredible, hands down my favorite movie that I watched. Well, my favorite new movie that I watched in April. Next, we watched Chamber of Secrets. Harry Potter, like I said, my marathon's going on, so we're not gonna talk about that. Oh, and then we watched Joker again. We went and saw this twice in theaters, we being my boyfriend and I, when it came out, and It's just an incredible, this is a perfect movie to me. There's only a handful of movies that I would say are perfect, Interstellar being one of them, Joker being another one. And honestly, beyond that, I don't know if I could say another perfect movie. I'd have to really think on it. And then we watched The Hunt, which was actually the last movie that I saw in theaters before lockdown in March. So it's kind of nostalgic for me. I remember walking into the theater to see this. It was right before lockdown, but theaters were still open. But the pandemic was, already going, and it just smelled like cleaner. Like everything was super sanitized, and it was just a weird experience. And then now looking back, it's even weirder. All right, next is a new release that I saw in theaters. I went to the theater, guys, for the first time in such a long time. I went and saw Voyagers, which is what I would consider to be the space movie of 2021. I don't think we got one for 2020 because it was such a chaotic year. And this was a good movie to be my first return back to the theater after so long of not going. There was no one in the theater. It was so nice. So Voyagers follows a group of people who were bred for intelligence and obedience that embark on a journey to another planet to repopulate as the future of the human race is at risk on Earth. The major thing that I liked about this movie was that the overall concept of creating people specifically for space travel and to repopulate another planet, I think is really creative and unique and an interesting premise. I gave it a 3 out of 5 though. It's not my favorite movie, my favorite space movie by any means. Would I own it? Maybe. I do have a good space movie collection going, so maybe it would have a place in my collection. But what I disliked about it is I needed more space. I needed more space visuals. I'm very particular about that. There are some shots that are very beautiful. I don't know if it was necessarily the budget that wouldn't allow for more space visuals or if it just wasn't important to the plot. Like they just didn't need to put more of that in there. Basically, the concept of this movie is Lord of the Flies in space. So although the overall concept I really liked and thought was original, it basically is a concept that's been done before in detail. So it's basically Lord of the Flies in space. So because of that, it makes it pretty predictable of a movie. You know how it's going to end. You just know. But that really didn't take away the fun aspect of this movie for me. Oh gosh. Okay, now let's talk about the worst movie that I watched in April. What Lies Below. Came out in 2020. This is another recent movie that was added to Netflix, and I think it was at some point Netflix #1 movie. People were watching it that much, why? I decided to watch this on a whim because it started playing the preview and I was like, sure. It was mid-afternoon and I just kind of felt like throwing something on, and that was What Lies Below. I was gonna say beneath, that's a different thing. This follows a mother and daughter who meet her mother's charming boyfriend for the first time. His intelligence and beauty make him seem like he's not really human after all. What I liked about the movie, the setting was pretty. They're at a lake house, so that's nice. Disliked, everything else, which I gave this a 2 out of 5. That is generous. I think I need to move this down to 1.5 out of 5 because no. The actors, not great. Again, it's one of those movies where there is absolutely no chemistry between any of the actors, and the ages portrayed in this don't make sense. I think the daughter plays an awkward 16-year-old girl in this. I think she's 27 in real life and is not like that. Not awkward at all. I'm sorry, but she's a little too old to play a 16-year-old. The plot is so ridiculous, and the ending, just why? It's so uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to watch. I just had question marks the whole time watching it. It's not worth it. Don't watch this if you've seen it being hyped up or anything like that, or the fact that it was being promoted so much on Netflix. Just don't do it. Next, I watched The Perfect Host, which is a 2010 movie. This follows a on-the-run convict looking for cover who convinces a man who's expecting to host a dinner party with friends to let him stay, although the host isn't exactly what he expected. So this movie starts out really strong. It's more of a drama thriller than a horror. It's not horror at all, but it's a thriller drama, I would say, and it starts out so strong. It really hooks you in. You never know where it's gonna go. As soon as it starts twisting a little and characters are changing, you're like, what is going on? where is this gonna go? And there's so much tension in this. Like, you can feel it in the characters. Like, it is just set up so well. But then where it goes, it gets a little too convoluted. Like, it did not need to be that complicated of a movie. Like, it went places it did not need to go. It becomes a little bit more procedural crime drama than thriller, and it's just like, we don't need that. It could have been such a simpler movie had it been kind of like The Invitation or The Gift in tone. Something like those two kind of remind me of the concept of The Perfect Host, but it wasn't executed well. And the ending isn't that bad, honestly. I really like the ending and the story towards the end. Is it super original? No. It starts original, but just kind of like fizzles out for me. So I gave that a 2.5 out of 5. Also, that was a rewatch. I described that like I hadn't seen it before, but I have. So the next movie might be a controversial movie. I don't know. It's Noah from 2014. I saw this in theaters when it came out and loved it. I found the DVD at Goodwill the other day while I was thrifting, and I had to buy it. This is such an underrated movie that no one saw and no one talks about, maybe because it's a biblical story and people automatically write that off if they're not religious. I'm an atheist. I'm not religious. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. You know, I don't believe in that kind of biblical stories or anything like that. But I love this movie. I give it a 4 out of 5. It is so good, so underrated. I mean, it genuinely has some horror elements. I mean, it is a biblical story after all. You can't tell me that there's not horror elements in the Bible. I'm sorry. And the acting is great. It has Emma Watson in it and Russell Crowe and Jennifer Connelly. It has really good actors in it. So I was really surprised that this movie is so underrated. Please let me know if you watched it before this video and your thoughts on it, because I think it's really done really well. The CG is questionable, okay? That's the one thing I would say isn't super strong in this movie. Is sometimes the CG is a little bit, especially for its time. It's kind of a modern movie, so it's a little bit. All right, next up we have Event Horizon from 1997. I was gonna say this was the oldest movie I watched this month, but it is not. We have a movie from 1995 later. So this follows a rescue crew who investigate a spaceship that disappeared into a black hole and has now returned. This is cheesy horror set in space. I don't know what there is to not love about that. I think there is a concept in this that directly inspired a concept in Interstellar, so how could you not love it? And I swear the plot of Event Horizon is so similar to Ad Astra, just like father-son in Ad Astra versus Space Crew. I like that Event Horizon isn't your typical black hole alien type story been done before. It's so much more psychological and so good. It's not for everyone. If you're not into like cheesy 90s action horror, you're probably not going to enjoy Event Horizon if you haven't seen it yet. If you have, I mean, most people have, I think, at this point. A lot of the lines and action parts of this movie are so cheesy. That's not necessarily automatically a negative, at least for me. It is a little bit cringy at times, and some people become very tropey. But beyond that, there are some like really serious like horror elements in this as well. I will say one other thing that I dislike about this movie is the unbelievability of some of the space stuff in there. Like, I don't think you can survive outside of the spaceship by just holding your breath. I don't think that's how the vacuum of space works. So some of it is a little bit fantastical and not even sci-fi. It's like going to fantasy level for some of the space related stuff. But I give it a 3 out of 5. It's really an enjoyable movie. It is a part of my space DVD collection, which DVD collection and storage setup and everything like that. New organization DVD collection is coming soon. I watched Prisoner of Azkaban, which is my favorite Harry Potter movie, in case you didn't know. And then lastly, the last movie we watched in April was Waterworld from 1995. This is set in the future where the ice caps have melted, causing the sea to rise so much that there seems to be no more dry land, and a mutated mariner helps a woman and a girl in the attempt to find dry land. This was a first-time watch for me, and let me just say that this is such an endearing movie. I don't know if that's like a really weird way to describe it. This was actually Ryan's pick, and I was so excited. about this movie. I loved the dystopian setting. If anything is a dystopian movie, I'm automatically going to like it at least a little bit. Like, just the setting alone is enough for me to get hooked into a movie if it's dystopian. Waterworld is essentially Mad Max in water. So if you're a fan of Mad Max, this is literally the same exact thing. Like, there's so many crossovers between Mad Max and Waterworld. It's just Mad Max in the desert, Waterworld and water. However, it is very cheesy and not really in a good way. Sometimes that's not automatically a negative, but in this case, some of the cheese wasn't that great. I did love this movie, don't get me wrong. I loved it. I definitely want to own it because the setting and like the concept is so cool to me. It actually is inspiring a fictional story that I'm writing. So it definitely like resonated with me and was so entertaining. I gave it a 3 out of 5 because it is, you know, kind of cheesy in a bad way, but overall, I love this movie. Highly, highly recommend it. So that is everything that I watched in the month of April. Please let me know your favorite and least favorite things that you watched in the month of April in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.